Hi, everybody. Today is September 19th. This is the meeting of the code organization subproject of SIG Architecture. Welcome, everyone. We have a smaller crowd today, so we'll see what we can get through. Let me share my screen, and then we can go through a few of the items that I have listed there. Share. Code organization, share. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay. So who do we have here? We have Matt, Mike, Wojtek. Okay. Sean. Okay. So I raised this in the SIG architecture call last week as well. There's a bunch of things that is in progress, or people are thinking about, or there are issues logged, or there is initial PR logged, and in some cases kept as well. And this is what I have collected over the last few days. Is anything missing? That's the first question.
Are there issues or like two words to describe like what aspect of each of these you're
Yes.
referring to? Sorry.
Yeah. That's fine. I'll type it in right now. KubeADM. Move to k/KubeADM repo, right? Test framework, move test framework to staging, move remove entry cloud providers. Credential provider is make them pluggable. kubectl move to staging. Hypercube move to another repository. Cloud controller manager move to staging. Move controllers as well, not just binary. Device plugin API, move to staging, just like CRI API. Kube's API server, move to staging. Kube proxy, move to staging. Docker shim, move to separate repository. ClientGo rewrite. That's all I got, Jordan.
What do you mean by Kube API server move to staging?
Okay, so this came up. I believe David Yates brought it up in the API missionary meeting. So basically, the thought here was when we were talking about moving kubectl and KubeADM out. So David pinged me asking, okay, do we eventually want to move Kube API server out of the main repository? And then if so, do we want to move to staging? Just like the other things. So API server could have its own cadence, and then maybe we could vendor things in or use when it eventually, if it gets moved out, then could we vendor it in? So the API machinery can evolve independent of the Kubernetes releases, and basically we would right now what is happening is the API machinery is using branches to do its work. For example, the server side apply, and then it's getting merged. So that's the current process that they are following, right? So is there an alternate way to do this to have more control over what they deliver when they deliver? that was the thought process there, Wojtek.
It seems like there are two, for several of these things, there are two steps. One is like the config. As we move to file-based config, having the actual Go types for that config published out so that people can use that makes a lot of sense. We already did that for most of the components. There are staging repos with config folders that have the config types. I don't think we did that for Kube API Server, partly because Kube API Server doesn't consume file-based config yet. But as it does, then we should definitely make those config types available. I think it's less clear what should be done as far as moving like the actual binary, like the code that you need to run the Kube API Server. I guess I would ask the question, what's the purpose of moving it out? Is it to isolate Kube API Server and like make dependencies really clear? Or is it to support using Kube API Server as a library? If it's the former, then I think that makes sense. If it's the latter, then I don't think Kube API Server is ready or intended to be used as a library at this point.
Right. I think I believe it was the library one. Sorry, Wojtek, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to mention that we already have like this generic API server in staging, right? So it's only about like customizing it for Kubernetes, more or less.
Yeah.
What is missing, which isn't clear that, like, for me at least, that it's really needed for the reuse purpose. Yes, as Jordan mentioned, for cleaner separation, it might make sense.
So yeah, I'm not opposed to isolating it in a staging repository, but if that's the purpose and we don't want people to take it and build on it like a library, we need to be extremely clear about that. To say if you want to use a library, use the API server library. That's what it's for. But Kube API Server is only intended for building Kube API Server. So yeah, I remember David saying that, but I didn't hear a lot else from him. I tried to sort these sort of in terms of things that are already in progress and already have plans around them, and then things that are not in progress as far as I know, but have really strong use cases around them. I think there's an issue open around the device plugin API where people who are consuming it are saying, you want us to write to this API, but then you tell us not to vendor Kubernetes, but you don't export the types. So what are we supposed to do with that? And that's a very reasonable issue. And so we should publish those as soon as possible. The credential provider, there are people who are using the generic ones that just consume like a secret or a file and then turn that into a registry credential provider. That is reasonable to want to reuse. As far as like making them pluggable, I think that needs more thought, but extracting the ones that people are reusing to a place where they can more easily reuse them makes sense.
Jordan, what other things can you think of as interdependency between these, right? For example, a few weeks ago, we had talked, Kubedium folks were saying, okay, we need the configs first, then we'll move out, right? So which ones should we prioritize here based on that kind of observation? Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah.
They were talking about configs for sure, and they were saying the configs should be beta or GA or something.
I don't see that as a compelling blocker to keep at them. I think we talked about this in the meeting with them.
Okay.
Like we have stability guarantees around command line flags and config files. So the things that you're currently driving via command line flags, you should rely on our stability guarantees. And if you encounter bugs, open them as breaking changes and we will fix them and backport them.
Okay.
I mean, we do want to move in the direction of config files, but I don't see how that blocks kubeatom from using our command line flags out of tree any more than it blocks any other deployer from invoking the API server out of tree.
Okay, so that's not really a thing that we need to concentrate then. So that's good.
I mean, I want I want version to config files for other reasons, but not to unblock moving kubeatom to staging or out of the repo.
Right. So since Mike is here, Mike, did you have any thoughts on Docker shim? Do you use it? Do you want to get rid of it? Do you want to move it out? Any thoughts there?
There's some leading questions right there, right?
Yeah, exactly. I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, I mean, personally, I'd like to eventually see it, be deprecated. But I know the Docker team had volunteered, or at least I remember the Docker team was going to volunteer to keep it alive. And it's always good to have, right, at least more than one, vendor. Although they're using containerd, so it's sort of, what's the point, right? Once we clean up the cry API enough that we don't need to go to Docker directly for workarounds, then certainly since Docker's already using containerd, it makes sense to just go directly to containerd and use the host namespaces, for k8s.io, as opposed to, having the issue of merging, containers between, pods and Docker containers. I don't know. I think we just, let's go with the current plan of cleaning up the cry API and removing all of the, the hacks where you have to go around the cry API to integrate directly with Docker.
Do we have a concrete list of like what is remaining, or is it still pretty vague at this point?
I think there was a concrete list, but then I saw a PR going in that made it +1, right? So it's one of those never-ending kind of things. You have to have a plan, I think, to get off it completely. You almost have to deprecate it first to get people to stop adding.
Step one is stop widening the gap.
Yeah, exactly. But we're not in a bad place with it, right? At this point in time, and we are thinning the gap up, and people aren't complaining when they move from cryo to containerd or from Docker to cryo. They're pretty much happy unless they had some hacks in the Docker API that they were expecting. And usually it's around some kind of feature that we just haven't got to kubelet yet. Like sidecar, really good sidecar support. There is a set of PRs I'm working on that might help that a little bit. At the bottom layer, we're all using run C, and that uses it has hook support. If we can formalize the accessibility of the hooks, we can probably get rid of most of the Docker API requirements that customers have when they want to go, switch to a cry implementation. So yeah, I think, let's push the PRs that give access to ad hoc uses of CRI runtimes. I think, and then we'll be able to, deprecate possibly, the Docker shim, and then we don't have to support it over time. Right. But I don't like the 3 release deprecation thing. I'd rather it be a lot, a couple of years kind of model.
Yeah, I think SIG Node can probably speak better to the specifics of like how to manage that deprecation. From code organization's perspective, it was more a question of like, should we be putting effort into splitting out Docker shim code just to isolate it? Like, are we planning to isolate it and stage it and publish it and maintain it externally? Or if the plan is leave it more or less as is, feature freeze it, put effort into CRI, like we're happy to to leave that to SIG node.
Yeah, I mean, we don't care at that point as long as it's out of. So the main reason for doing this is we want to take out Docker dependency from.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's like the bottom line.
So like, it's more of a time frame. Like if we put stuff in staging, it still doesn't really help us because we still have the dependency on Docker. So it's more knowing what SIG node's time frame is
right
for this.
Yeah, exactly. And as soon as we set that time frame down, we'll be able to put more focus on the CryTools tests as opposed to
Okay. Who is driving the Docker shim kept stuff from SIG node's side?
At this point, there's two people who touched. Feisky touched it, wrote it initially, and then there was one more person who took over from Feisky, but I didn't see any progress after that. So I'll have to go back and ping people.
Was that you or yeah?
I don't think it was anybody from Google who touched it.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the other related question here, Mike, is there is a streaming package that is being used by all the CRI implementers. Yeah. And the last I heard about it from Talclair was we want to fold that into CRI, but then nobody has proposed, what the interface change is going to look like or anything of that sort. So if we have that as like a small progress that we can make this time, that would be incredible as well, I think.
Yeah, I like that. It was a pain to do the streaming implementation on Containerd.
Yeah, okay. So you agree that's a
I agree it needs to be done. I don't think we were finished with what the architecture should look like for streaming. And what I was beating my head into was the problem about certificates, and authentication. We didn't really have a good strategy for that at the kube layer. Insofar as we can do an HTTP connection, right, on Containerd and Cryo for external customers that want to connect to our runtime for stats and things like that. But we don't have a good way to authenticate the certificates that we're using for that, nor do we have it between any other node server with kube. So when we create those streams, we're doing self-authentication. I think we need to fix that. We need some way to have a kube authenticator that's more of a public authenticator as opposed to we all self-authenticate. We're in a node. It's clear. It's okay. We're root, right? It's good. We all handshake and move along. But I think we need a better authentication.
So is this for the CRI implementation to call back into kube to say, is this a legit call? Or are you talking about
sort of. The way it works is that there's a request to do it, to open up a stream for, say IO or whatnot. And we create that stream. When we do, it's a direct connection between us and API server that was originally proxied through kubelet. And when we do that, there's an authentication process for that connection because it's over HTTP, and we just provide a self-authenticated certificate.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that they were leading towards continuing your proxy through the kubelet. Am I misremembering that?
I can't remember. It was going back and forth. There was performance problems with proxy.
Yeah.
In the end, you're directly connected, right? The stream is directly connected. But there is a proxy handoff, essentially. An HTTP proxy handoff.
When proxying through the kubelet, you're not directly connected. It's user to API server to kubelet to runtime.
On the initial connection, but then directly to
just to note, it's 2:30, and there might be other things we want to talk about. It sounds like Node needs to figure out the architecture, but there's nothing concrete for code organization to do right now.
I don't think so.
Right. Yeah. Well, we can help find owners, I guess. That would be the max we can do.
Yeah. When the Node and the runtime folks figure out what they want to do, we can help get those libraries where they need to be for people to consume them.
Okay. So there was one more thing that got added, the cubes scheduler. Who added this one?
The teams.
Oh, this was just a
Yeah, I added.
refactor of some config types to an external location.
Yeah, because externally, some user, for example, using the scheduler extender, right now they have to vendor Kubernetes/Kubernetes, but that is totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
And also it have the option of the component config for scheduler.
Okay. So are you planning to do this work?
Yes, I will do that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I will do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that falls into the existing pattern of taking config types and putting them into places people can consume them, which makes lots of sense.
Okay. So let's see who else is here. Matt, did you have anything specific to talk about? Going once? Going
Nope.
Twice? Okay. Wojtek, was there anything else you were wanting to talk about in this list?
No, I don't think so.
And what's your son's name?
Sorry?
What's your son's name?
Kacper.
Okay, nice. Thanks for sharing his picture with us. Okay. So the test framework, let's start from the beginning one more time. So the cloud providers, I'm going to poke at the OpenStack one again to see if they made any progress with the CISM migration stuff, so we could then remove it. It did move to staging unnecessarily, but then anyway, long story. So the kubectl, is there any work for 117, Sean?
Yeah, actually, so we've got 90 to 95% of kubectl moved into staging. I have a PR out now, which is going to rewrite basically all the kubectl printing tests for internal resources. It's a substantial PR, but it only touches testing code. So for kubectl convert, my strategy to get that out, it's now deprecated, is to first create it as a plugin. It's not clear which repo this plugin will live in, but once that plugin exists, then I'll feel more comfortable removing that code from kubectl. We announced the deprecation back in 1.13 a year ago, so we are now able to remove kubectl convert, and then the final blocker from getting all of kubectl into staging is RBAC, a dependency on RBAC in the kubectl auth reconcile command. And I think Jordan may have at least a plan, if not made some progress on that. Is that correct, Jordan?
I have a plan. We'll see how well it fares when it meets reality. I started looking at pulling those packages out, and there were a couple nasty dependencies that made me have to pull in API server, which I don't want. So it might take a little longer to unwind than I thought, but I think we'll get there. If I understand it, the initial benefit of getting it into staging is for reuse by people who wanted to use like get and the various commands that we have. And then the second benefit was to let us publish kubectl at different cadences than the main Kubernetes release. Is that right? I mean, obviously, until we totally detach it from staging, we're not going to publish at different cadences. So,
right.
Yeah. The short answer, the RBAC stuff looks doable, but maybe a little bit involved. It's not my priority this release, but I could outline what needs to be done if someone else wanted to put time into it.
Yeah, I'll definitely put some time into that if you need some help with that. But if I could get some more direction from you, that'd be great. On that last one dependency, that's going to be very painful.
Okay. So going down the list, we already talked about the device plugin API, credential providers. The KubeADM folks seem to be making some progress. I saw some updates from them. There was a cluster API F2F, so people are not around today, so they're traveling back home. Test framework, I have to check on it. I don't know how far they got or what their plans are. Hypercube, I will propose an umbrella issue or a KEP to outlining the steps, and we'll create another repository. Oh, going back to Sean. Sean, did you need a new repository for a plugin? Is that what you said?
That's what we're considering, a Kubernetes SIGs repository for community developed plugins.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So-
that sounds like a good idea. So maybe we can get started on that at least.
And we'll seed it with this first kubectl convert plugin.
Okay. Thank you. Well, the other one that came to mind immediately when you said that was the debug API has a plugin. Maybe we can throw that in there too, right?
Yeah, I think that there's several that make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Something to keep in mind, especially like for convert to work, it needs to depend on the Kubernetes repo. Like you probably don't want one repo that has a lot of different plugins that has such a brutal dependency tree.
So question about that, Jordan. If we were to go and actually separate out the Kube API server, put all of our internal APIs into a different segregated spot, you would at least not pull in kubelet-style dependencies like the various runtimes and runtime clients when we did that. Would that make it easier overall?
Is a kubectl convert plugin that only works on a few Kube API server types worth a lot of work to maintain?
That's a good question, and I had assumed. So my thinking is that there's, even though we announced deprecation a year ago, there's still going to be people who depend on this, and us giving those people either a plugin or even just a binary, a separate binary that they can somehow download to plug in that functionality, I think is pretty useful. We could just leave them high and dry. Maybe this as a plugin is not the correct approach. Maybe it's just a separate binary. I'd be willing to, I'd love to hear everybody else's take on that.
So if I got to choose, if I were king of the world and could do whatever I wanted in this repo, I would come in and I would say that we are going to create a Kube API server convert command, that there would be a subcommand on the Kube API server that would actually convert the resources that it directly understood, that it would be shaped such that it could be plugged in as a plugin to kubectl if someone truly wanted to. And since it is just a straight scheme conversion, that it would be almost free to the Kube API server and a large cost to anyone else, if I were king of the world.
Right.
I don't know how the general sentiment outside of myself trends. Jordan would probably have opinions.
I like the idea of it living next to the thing that already understands all the types, rather than trying to like have some other repo then pull in and depend on all the Kube API server stuff. That seems very small and doable. Like the distribution, the build distribution mechanics could get a little messy, but
I would like to, having thought about it more than just those 30 seconds, I thought while you were talking, I would like to actually move all the types to a single repo and put the command there, right? Like when you look at the dependency tree of what that would actually involve, that entails nothing more than a scheme receiver, basically. You have a way to build a scheme, you register everything in the scheme, and if we look at what we've done in the OpenShift API repo, we've already built what's essentially required to do this. So I think that would be more maintainable over time, and you would actually get better traction for conversion logic overall if you were able to give an example that was tiny.
yeah, it reopens the discussion about whether we want people consuming internal and conversion and defaulting logic and types.
I mean, put a README in there that says we don't intend this as a thing that will be stable. I'm sure people will read it and
Ignore it.
So, like, but if you look at it and what it would take to build it, like that ends up being, I think, a cleaner solution.
Yeah, it does sound cleaner. Should I put something on the SIG API machinery agenda?
I think Jordan and I might have to battle this out over a drink.
Okay.
To have the two of us. I've made peace with the fact that people will abuse my lovely repos, and I'm not sure Jordan has made that same peace.
Okay. So whatever communication
Sean
happens.
wants an action item, David. You need to give him an action item.
Yeah. Having a drink is actually a great action item.
Is there an issue around the convert stuff that we can at least put some of these thoughts in?
Not yet.
Okay. Maybe open that up for like what we plan to do with convert, and we'll track like the deprecation and the replacement and like what we're wanting people to do and alternatives under that.
Got it. I'll open up that issue and CC both David and Jordan.
Okay.
Okay. Can you mind getting me on Slack? Because yeah, the CC doesn't work so well for me.
Okay, I will.
Thanks.
Okay. Since I see Clayton sneak in along with David, Clayton, did you have any thoughts on what's on screen?
No.
No.
The test one we talked about already, and I think that one's the only one that I felt still needs a lot of movement outside of the SIG, just in terms of like getting agreement and getting work queued up for the hard parts of it. So it's on my list of things to do a little bit of nagging on. So other than that, it's pretty clear.
The test framework, you mean?
Not just test framework, but the EDEs start tightening the dependency, allowed dependencies. So that's maybe a second bullet point.
Okay. Okay. So I think we are done with the rest of the things here that we wanted to talk about. Oh, the ClientGo stuff. We didn't talk about the ClientGo stuff yet. So let me backtrack a little bit. So the ClientGo I added this morning based on something that I saw float by, which was Darren's usage of, you all saw that one, right? I pinged Liget on it, and Clayton, you responded on that one as well. So Clayton, you had mentioned that the ClientGo could be rewritten. That's where I remember adding this from.
The last comment in there was that the use case itself is unsupported, which is mixing and matching our core libraries with different versions. So it's like a 114 ClientGo against 116 API machinery. Like we've never even tried to make that work. So I didn't understand what the Like, I feel like the ask was something that we've repeatedly said is crazy land. But on the surface, it looks like not crazy land. And so I do want to make sure that we didn't miss something in the request.
Right. The other thing that came out of this request was the deprecation policy for the Go API. I remember when we were doing static checks, we tried to keep or leave the existing, public stuff, not rename them and things like that. But then Jordan pointed out to me today was we don't have a policy for the Go API. So do we keep going this way? Do we need something at least for staging? That's the question here.
So I feel like this is a discussion for SIG API machinery with owns ClientGo. I think it's relevant to ask it here, but I think ultimately this is a SIG API machinery decision, not ours.
Right. The specific problem from Darren is SIG API machinery for sure, but then we do have general policies across, right? So we have many staging repositories, and we could be talking about any other.
Yeah, I mean, I think the default policy is that there's nothing between versions or even within versions, because that's the policy we've always had. ClientGo, I believe the policy we've acted on for ClientGo is we don't break it within a Z stream. API, we definitely don't break ever. Like Kate's API.
Right. So we should write this down, right? There are two things that you said. One is you should use the companion of the same version, right? That was one. The other one was we don't break within an 1.x series.
I'd like to soften that to without a really good reason, right? Like if someone comes up and finds that, like, I don't know, some API just has the wrong argument, not safe, we would break it.
That's a really good, like, because we have occasionally had changes that were backported to ClientGo for very good reasons.
So also to be clear, like the API machinery repos README is say things like there are no compatibility guarantees. It's in direct support of Kubernetes. Branches will track Kubernetes and be compatible with that repo. Like matched versions are required for all of those components and always have been. I think the things like the generated client proposal that David was talking about are like part of the goal behind that is to come up with something that is intended from the beginning to be consumed and to have minimal dependencies and to be more compatible release to release. All of the components that we've extracted today have been extracted from a code base that wasn't originally intended as a library, and it shows. And so kind of arbitrarily saying, oh, well, today, as of today, we will no longer allow changing these Go types just isn't realistic as far as this wasn't an API designed as a library. And so freezing it at a point in time is not going to work well. I think it would work much better to actually design things as libraries and from the beginning have them as external semantically versioned repositories.
Right. To be clear, I'm not asking for a stricter policy. All I'm saying is we need verbiage that we can point somebody to.
We can copy the existing READMEs into more visible places. That's good and fine. And give guidance around how to achieve those matched versions. So we recently updated the ClientGo install and README with information about how to use the tags that are given across those components. But yeah, we can make that more visible. And doing that in parallel with efforts so that people who want to consume libraries and not be broken have a more reasonable way to do that release to release. I've said many times, I think we have the energy as a project to maintain compatibility to like 1 or 2 or 3 sets of APIs. And for us, the priority has always been the REST APIs and the config and CLI libraries as APIs. So we care intensely about that and that's where most of our compatibility energy goes.
Okay. So Jordan, can you point me to the existing verbiage, and I will draft up something which is in a more public spot.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Now we do have 15 more minutes. Does anybody want to go through the issues or PRs? There's only a couple of them, PRs at least. Issues are not that many either. We don't have to click through each issue. We'll just scroll through them. Is that okay? Let's do the PR one first. So hack E2E Go. The PR is from Ben, but one of the questions in this is, there is a make target that we don't know who's using. It's called make test E2E Go or something like that. So do we have precedence of how or when we can get rid of stuff from the make target? Jordan?
I don't have a good sense for that.
Okay.
I would say SIG testing and anyone downstream of that. I don't know if the Clayton, do you know if the conformance stuff uses that in any instructions or points to that? I know Tim St. Clair was pushing on getting test D to E artifacts externally consumable, but I don't know in what form.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would put it on SIG testing.
Okay. The other one was the licenses stuff, regeneration. I don't know if anybody's interested here. The only person who was interested was Tim Hawken, and this person who's filing the issue needed some help, so I'm going to be helping him. And I put it under code organization because we're moving stuff around. Going to issues.
Is that all it takes for it to be the responsibility of code organization? I've got a bunch of PRs to go tag in now.
Thanks, Jordan. So does anybody know about this port allocator as a component? What is a port allocator? Okay.
Yeah, I would push it to network.
I feel like I'm the owner of this because nobody wants it because it was so terrible, but I'm pretty sure someone's changed it later and I can blame them. Network is definitely the right place.
Okay, I won't worry about that then. Device plugins, we talked about it. Credential provider, we talked about it. The import boss, we did some work before. We are not going to touch this anymore. Maybe I should just close the issue.
I thought the OpenStack cloud provider got staged. Didn't that merge?
It did. Yeah, that got merged just before 1.16 was cut.
Great.
Then this import dependencies in package controller. Oops, where am I? Okay, this is from. Okay, this is the same thing. Import boss. It's related to that. Dependencies YAMLs, get rid of staging. That's not going to have. Vendor dependencies. We talked. So one thing here is there's at least one PR where I'm pushing back hard on somebody saying, let me give you the background. So there is a repository called Microsoft/HCS shim, and there is a PR to update that, and I'm like pushing back on it, and I have a hold on that PR. So is it good to press on people like that, or should I just leave it alone and allow the random SHA?
I think it depends on how reviewable the change is. And how critical the fix is. So if it's fixing an issue that is affecting Kubernetes and you're actually reviewing the diff of the dependency and can see like, okay, I see this bug is getting fixed and no other changes are coming in, then I wouldn't push too hard. If it's a big diff and you don't have, or the dependency reviewer doesn't have expertise to be able to review it, then I think we should err on the side of requiring going to releases that the maintainer of that dependency tagged. If if it's really like getting contentious and it's going back and forth, like actually reaching out to like the people who maintain that dependency and saying, is this a reasonable place to snapshot your dependency at? Like maybe we could go there. I think it just depends kind of where on the spectrum it falls.
Yeah, I just feel that the people that I'm pushing back on haven't really tried poking those maintainers. That's my issue here.
I mean, kind of explaining those three things. Like, is this fixing a critical bug? If not, is it pulling in lots of unrelated changes? Can we get some feedback from the maintainers that this is a reasonable place to snapshot at?
Okay. I will chase that one more time after the call. Okay. I think we've done the rest of the things before many times. Let's just go to the end. Okay. Nothing new there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would probably go ahead and close the ones that are calling out cloud provider sizes. Like we have plans in place for cutting those ties, and the issues that call out sizes aren't particularly actionable right now.
Yeah, I'll at least remove it from code organization, I guess. Right? Let them.
Keeping it on cloud provider's radar is probably fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. I'll do that. Okay. So that's it I have. We have 6 minutes left, unless anything else anybody wanted to talk about today.
It's not exactly code organization, but it might show up in a few places. The Go 113 work is starting. I resolved a couple cycles that we had with some of our dependencies that let us run tidy commands under Go. My guess is we will try to switch to Go 113 without using modules in our build at first, just because it minimizes the number of changes we need in our build scripts. And we would really like to be able to take Go 113 back to 116, because 116 will still be under support once Go 112 expires support, which is not a great position to be in. So we'll probably stage this in 2 phases. The first phase, just switching to Go 113, and then a second phase where we start to use modules in our build and hopefully get rid of a lot of cruft around Go path malarkey in our build scripts.
So just a comment, like I would like to wait for like performance improvements.
Oh yeah.
It seems that like we already figured out what needs to be fixed. The patches are under review, if I remember correctly. So
yeah, I linked to the issue in the Go 113 issue. So we will wait for 113.1 or whenever the scale tests show that those were resolved before we actually commit.
Okay, so this reminded me of one more thing that I wanted to ask you all about, which was there was a PR from somebody for RISC-64 support, and that updated some of the packages and also eliminated CGO or something to that effect.
The one that eliminated CGO, I think, already merged. That wasn't the RISC-64. That built on top of, I forget which dependency it was. The one that eliminated CGO already merged.
Okay. So do we expect any more stuff similar to that show up? Do you know?
I always expect new architectures to show up. I want to see Kubernetes built for WebAssembly. I want to run it in my browser. No, when we bump to Go 113, the golang.org/x dependencies, we will also bump to the 113 release branches.
Okay, then the last one from me. Jordan, you were talking about some socket stuff. Do you remember that? There is a problem with handshake or streams breaking, which is deep inside. And it shows up. Okay, I have to remember. I'll ping.
Oh, this was the API machinery thing.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
That's nothing about Go versions. Like that's something for API machinery. Don't worry about that.
Okay.
I mean, worry about it, but not here.
Okay. So that has nothing to do with updating dependencies. So we don't have to worry about newer versions of stuff. Okay. Sounds good. Okay, thanks a lot, everyone. Talk to you all in 2 weeks. Bye.